Hello everyone, welcome to Story Vault YouTube channel. Hope you enjoy the video. Which is the most haunting deathbed confession you know of? Story 1. One of my uncles confessed to having 2 other children with another woman. He thought he was going to die from COVID, and I guess he felt he needed to come clean. He didn't die. That was back in 2020, and there's still a ridiculous amount of drama happening over potential inheritances and whatnot. Story 2. My grandmother confessed to me that I'm adopted. What haunts me is that her dementia was so bad that she legitimately believed I didn't know. For context, I'm Korean. My sister's Mexican, and our parents are white. I spent the last few hours with her letting her act as if she were breaking it to me gently and promising I wouldn't be upset with my parents for not telling me, even though they had and it was kinda hard to miss. Comments. Man, dementia sucks. I watched my great-grandfather slowly turn into a shell of a person. When I found out he had forgotten me, I fell apart. I look back at it now and laugh cause when my mom asked him who I was, he just said alcoholic. He wasn't exactly wrong at the time. Now my grandma is going through dementia, and it's to the point where we have the same conversations over again, sometimes within minutes. It's so draining to play along as if everything is normal, but you're just filled with dread as you lose someone you love. I'm sorry for your situation. Spend as much time as you can with them. My Oma, grandma, passed in 2020 when COVID had everything shut down and I couldn't go to the funeral. Still haunts me to this day. The last time I saw her, we took a car ride for about an hour. That trip consisted of her asking me, which of my children do you belong to, on repeat. I had no clue what to do, so eventually I started making up things. Had a blast with it. She was excited because I was. Truly turned that emotionally hard time into something I can always cherish. My mom is the youngest of 7, and I have 36 cousins on that side. By the end of the car ride, I had lived in about 10 different states and had 6 completely different jobs. Stay strong. I'm sorry you are going through this. Story 3. There was a couple where the wife got some mental illness where she wouldn't go outside the house. This went on for years. Eventually, after counseling, she made a little progress and agreed to go to the drugstore one night. She went in while her husband stayed in the car. While she was in the drugstore, someone walked in, shot her in the back of the head, and walked out. She died immediately, and the shooter was never caught. For years, everyone thought it was some insane paranormal thing, like she somehow knew that being out in public would lead to her death, etc. Many decades later, the husband admitted on his deathbed that he had hired someone to kill her because he could not take her mental illness anymore. Story 4. My stepfather requested to see the 2 other families he had that nobody knew about on his deathbed. Boy, was that fun. Comments. Who's got this kind of time? Who's got the dollar? What did this guy do for a living? Story 5. Reading these is crazy. All my grandpa said on his deathbed was, "Can someone turn off that smell after I open my breakfast burrito?" Comments. Poor guy getting crop dusted on his deathbed with breakfast burrito farts. The worst kind of farts. Terrible way to go out. LOL, seriously. I felt terrible afterwards. Story 6. My grandfather revealed that my mother was not his only child. In the 1950s, when his longtime best friend was unable to impregnate his wife, my grandfather spent a week, in a remote cabin in the Ozarks having sex with this guy's wife in order to give them a child. He said they had sex over 20 times. His friend even walked in on them once having sex on the kitchen counter after he drove down for the day to check on them. No phone at the cabin. Well, the week of sex worked and she got pregnant. The couple then moved out of state to start a new life as a family. To this day, it is their only child and she's not aware of her biological dad. The only communication my grandfather received from them afterward was a letter giving confirmation the child was born a healthy little girl. He never saw his friend again, but stated he often thought about that cabin in the woods. Comments. A week of non-stop sex with your buddy's wife. Yeah, I'd think about that often too. I'll stop my birth control just before we go to that glorious weekend cottage. It's so funny to me that it wasn't even just business. On the kitchen counter, they meant that shit. Story 7. My great-great-uncle admitted on his deathbed that he wasn't actually related to our family. He'd spent the last 40 years in the U.S. using one of our distant relatives' citizenship papers since they looked close enough, and in the 1920s that was really all you needed. He didn't kill the real uncle or anything. The guy had just decided America wasn't for him and went home. This dude was like, hey, since you aren't wanting to go back, can I have your papers? And that was that. Not haunting at all, but my family doesn't have very many deathbed confessions, so it's still technically the most haunting. Comments. Totally not uncommon back then for immigrants to America. Identity, theft, and false documents were so easy. There was such poor record keeping everywhere, especially between nations, even between states in the USA. I had a roommate with a similar story. His young uncle was a naturalized American citizen from Colombia. One day, he took a vacation back to Colombia to visit family, had a heart attack, and died. My roommate took his papers, passed himself off as his uncle, and off to the US he went. He was here for years illegally under his uncle's name, until he met an American girl, married, and properly naturalized. I had known the guy for about 15 years before he told me his real name. To this day, I still call him by the uncle's name every now and then. Story 8. My wife is a CNA in a nursing home. She had a resident who was formerly a delivery OB nurse in the 70s and 80s. When she was on her last few breaths, my wife was leaning into her face to clean it, and she whispered in my wife's ear, "When I was a nurse, I switched babies around. I'm not sure what's worse, knowing that one child may not be your child, or that this woman could have done it many times." Comments. Debbie, you're in charge of changing babies. You got it. Was she just doing it for fun, or was it to spite people? Why would anybody do that? Could be state of mind due to illness or drugs creating false memories, I hope anyway. I think it's possible a lot of these confessions are untrue, and due to dementia or other reasons. Can't take someone at their word just because they're dying. Story 9. When I was in hospital, the guy in the bed next to me just asked to stop taking his meds as he was ready to die. Last thing I heard him say was, "There's no one waiting for me at home, so I'm going where they are." Wasn't really a shocking confession, just a lonely and heartbreaking one. Story 10. One of my aunts confessed to my mom that she slept with my dad and gave him herpes. We all knew, but she didn't know we knew. Story 11. My grandpa whispered something cryptic right before he passed. He said, "The garden gnome." It was always him, and then just closed his eyes forever. It's been 10 years, and I still get chills thinking about it. I mean, what garden gnome? Why him? I never even got to ask. Comments. You better go crack open that garden gnome. If there's nothing in it, dig underneath. There's always money in the banana gnome. Story 12. This is in Nicaragua. My grandmother let us all know that she was a product of rape. My great-grandmother was an indentured servant on a sugar cane plantation and was assaulted by its owner, a rich family that still owns a lot of land to this day. Our great-grandmother gained her freedom from the sugar cane plantation because of her pregnancy, and was even given hush money and a house. The house we were all standing in that night. My whole family now understood why our great-grandmother was the way she was. It all made sense. Made us all sad that she was never comforted. Comments. How was she? What things made sense? My great-grandma was very closed off and not very affectionate. She was an incredibly hardworking woman that taught my grandma and my mother great life skills, but you can tell that there was just something about her that was missing. We always thought it was a lost love. Now we know that it was just a horrible past. Story 13. Not really this, but my mom was raised in KY, where all the miners and coal operators were in conflict in the 1930s and she told about some older man who had worked for the coal company and had presumably done some bad stuff on their behalf. Car bombs, shootings, I don't know. As he lay dying in the hospital years, later the coal company had someone sit in his room 24 hours to be sure he did not do any deathbed confessions. Creepy as hell, I always thought. Story 14. In the 70s, there was an unsolved murder of a teenage girl in my hometown, and some beloved guy from the community allegedly confessed to the murder on his deathbed. It's just spooky to think that even the nicest people may be monsters. Comments. Everyone is capable of great goodness and horrible darkness. It's scary to fully sit in that reality, so we all live our lives avoiding the areas of gray each and every one of us inhabits. Story 15. An electrician I apprenticed for told me about the time he was pulling cable in an attic and found a revolver under the insulation, with 5 loaded cylinders and 1 spent casing. He called the cops. They were able to close a 40-year-old cold case, but the perp was in a nursing home on O2, so they just let him run out the clock. Story 16. My school teacher told the class at the time his father-in-law was on his deathbed. He told the family to check the walls. Nobody knew what he meant until they did some renovations years later and found gold ingots in the walls. Not really haunting, but still crazy. So, that's the end of the video. Hit the like button and subscribe. Have a good day and see you in the next video.